And I'm delighted to be able to welcome Hannah Stone, who's a poet and an academic theologian. And she's been working with the Church Institute as a poet theologian. And some of you who look on the website may see some of her blogs. And I think there's also a book of poetry as well. So welcome to Hannah. I hope you're there. And we're also going to have some slides to share as well.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Carol. And I think Miriam is very kindly going to put up slides of the poems I'm going to read, which are about different sorts of losses in later life. These poems all relate to older people I had caring responsibilities for. The first was an elderly lady who used to babysit for me, who had no family and for whom I took on lasting power of attorney. And in common with a lot of older people, she began to become more physically frail. And in particular, she kept falling over and it really distressed her. And in the end, I had to arrange, at her request and at the hospital's insistence, to move her into a care home. But prior to that, she had a wonderful flotilla of carers who would come and visit her at home to help look after her. So the first poem, Miriam's going to run the PowerPoint, I think, so we could move on to the first slide, is called Care in the Community. She rests in her narrow bed, kindly made up by a friend who isn't that good at hospital corners. Sometimes she sleeps deeply under the faded gaze of her lord. Other nights she's restless, wishes she was safe as the crinolined lady it takes her half an hour to dust. China knickknacks have a secure place on the mantelpiece. And if stiff fingers were to drop a treasure on the hearth, oblivion is instantaneous. No rehab ward for shattered shepherdesses, no waiting for the thud of skull on path as she stoops with the milk bottles, no fear of falling. So, and I know there are, specialist physiotherapists who work with people to prevent falls, and this was something she really dreaded, was falling over. And unfortunately, even in the care home, she fell over as well. So that was for my friend Peggy, who sadly died on Easter Day last year. The next poem is about my father, who, like my mother, lived and died with dementia. And just a word of explanation about the title. Discalced is a word that's used to describe members of monastic communities, monks and nuns, who, not so much these days, but who traditionally used to walk barefoot. And people sometimes walk barefoot on a pilgrimage, don't they? So this relates to my dad. And as I hope the poem makes clear, it's about his loss of independence and also that kind of anxiety that we have, which Mo described, of when you're caring for someone and how it kind of has to interweave with your own life. So I was leading a very full life, doing 2 different academic jobs, and I'd get calls from his carer or other hospitals or whatever saying there's a problem with your dad, and I was supposed to be in an exam board meeting or something, and I was really torn. So that's what this poem is about. He's fine, your carer says. He's lost a shoe, but happy going barefoot. I thank her and return to my meeting, where I'm distracted by the thought of you steadying 1 foot at a time on the 15 treads of the stairs, your toes leaning into the deep pile. As you go up, then down, because you don't remember why up or even what up is. And I try to take an interest in a smart spreadsheet, pleased to think you'll be wearing socks in a nice shade of fawn, the colour of post-war frugality, and that she made these for you, fingers flashing the 4 silver spears, which clacked and clattered as she turned the heel, knitting her love into each pair. Something you can run your fingers over, because now that words are treacherous, textures console. And I plan to make for your birthday a patchwork cushion from scraps of warm Welsh wool edged with blanket stitch. And I'll show your hands its narrative of elusive shades from a forgotten land. And this seems suddenly so much more urgent than commenting on the coded cells which populate the page. A necessary ministry, a laying on of hands. So my mum was my dad's primary carer for several years before it just became impossible, and he also had to go into a care home. My mum, who died just at the end of last year, just before I got COVID, just absolutely hung on for bitter death at home, and we almost managed to keep her at home until she died. But she had a sort of medical problem caused by her increasing frailty that meant she went into a hospital briefly and then into a care home while we arranged what was going to need to be 24-hour live-in care. And sadly, like my friend Peggy, like my elderly uncle, she caught COVID in the care home and died of COVID in her care home. But this was while she was still at home. And this is, it's a prose poem. It looks like prose, but it is a way of writing poetry which is kind of halfway between prose and poetry. And it's from a series of poems I wrote about my parents and about memory and kind of the sources in their life. In my mother's case, she was a great reader. She was very interested in the classics, and also the poem talks a lot about the family home in which I grew up, and how her cat was her real kind of significant other after my dad had gone. Sleeping Beauty. She dozes during the day, drugged by the dregs of decades, the lees of an active life spilt beneath slippered feet. Sleeps slack-mouthed, her face a chalice lifted up to the ceiling, where cracks widen and plaster flakes into wafers. While her eyes are closed, ash seedlings in the garden thicken into thickets, and a fox parades around the lawn with impunity. In the evening, moths come out of hiding to threaten the carpets, lacing their flight with wisps of conversation. Memories spiral to the surface, become clogged with words, and sink again. The cat nudges the cat flap with her nose. Out stares the fox and comes back in. Curls round the nighttime hours on the bed, where lungs rise and fall, and the dawn waits for a kiss which will never come again. And the final poem is kind of bridging my mother and me, really, because while she was living at home 200 miles away in London, I was doing my best to care for her, and I'd ring her up and, you know, talk to her, and we'd have these kind of scripted conversations where nothing really was communicated, because she was not ever going to admit she needed help, even though we knew she did, and we'd put care in place, and I would travel during the pandemic to take her to memory clinic appointments and cardiology appointments and everything else. So, but she could never, ever admit to needing any help. And I wrote this poem, and it's also about how you acknowledge your own aging, and as you see, you know, your parents aging and dying, you realise, you know, that's going to happen to you, isn't it? So this is the truth about cats and courgettes. Oh, I should say also, I have cats. This was my one of my elderly cats who died 3 years ago, and like my mum, I'm absolutely devoted to my cats. My cat died. That was a really big loss. So that's another type of loss, isn't it? And when we perhaps can't have pets anymore because we're too old to look after them, that can be really difficult. My cat spurns laps and halves, shuns stroking, wefts her tail with slut's wool under the spare bed. Spine retreats into corrugated peaks. I do not speak of these signs when I call my mother. In turn, she neglects to mention that the vegetables I left prepared in her fridge last month are slime in the salad drawer. We exchange scripted comments about meals to be enjoyed and the companionship of cats. Like her hand holding the phone to her good ear, mine now has freckles which outstay the summer. So thank you for sharing those with me, and I hope they will feed into our reflection that follows.